A U.S. blockade of Iranian ports comes into effect as Donald Trump again claims Tehran is desperate for a deal. But major sticking points remain, casting doubt on whether the current ceasefire will hold. Washington sees resistance against its blockade from friends and foes. While NATO countries refuse to get involved, China sails a ship through Hormuz. Saudi Arabia, though, reportedly fears another key body of water will be shut. Also, the conflict's ramifications wash up on the shores of India. With rising fuel costs halting maritime activity, we look at how the war could sink local fishing communities. And Dhaka is moving on. A top foreign affairs advisor says former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina is now an irrelevant figure in Bangladesh. We take a look at a possible reset in ties with India. Hello and welcome. You're watching RT India. I'm Osama Shah, live from New Delhi. Let's begin with the latest from the ongoing Iran conflict. Formerly not America's problem, the Strait of Hormuz could be on the verge of becoming an even bigger global headache. That's after Donald Trump rolled out a counter move to blockade Iranian ports.
The thing is, can you believe this? We don't use the Strait. We don't need the Strait. We have our own oil and gas, much more than we need. We have more oil and gas than Saudi Arabia. Think of this. We produce more. Saudi Arabia, and add Russia to it. Substantially more. And by next year, we'll have double that amount. So we don't need it, but the world needs it.
Iran is not happy, and rightly so. What we're going through is, objectively speaking, is another round of peace talks, negotiations, discussions, whatever you may call it. And despite that, there is still a continuing American posturing within the region. Yes, the United States unilaterally declared a blockade, preventing ships from entering or leaving the Strait of Hormuz. But let's not forget that while this was happening, the United States was reinforcing its positions in the region in the attempt, or preemptively speaking, in case these talks go south. But despite that, Iran is also issuing a word of caution to anybody in the region, particularly those in the Gulf, ranging from Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar, suggesting that these countries are also complicit in the U.S. and Israel's aggression against Iran. However, Iran's military warns that, and this is of course a circumstantial and conditional suggestion, that if these talks do go south, that Iran is in a position where it can continue to fight back against the United States. In fact, the IRGC says that they will surprise their aggressors. Let's listen to what the IRGC has to say.
If the war continues, we will reveal capabilities the enemy has no idea exist. We will also introduce new forms of warfare that the enemy will have little ability to counter.
So where we stand at this moment suggests that there may be a second round of talks. We know that the potential venue could be a second round in Islamabad. There are talks that Oman might be in the frame as well. And other reports suggest that there could be even more neutral territory, such as Geneva. Neutral to the United States, perhaps, but let's not forget that Iran has been discussing nuclear options with its European counterparts over the past year or two. And despite that, the Israeli administration carried out attacks against Iran. So there's very little trust in that regard. But looking at how things progress, we can assume that the talks may continue. But of course, it's definitely on the edge as to what happens next, given the U.S. posturing in the region, the tug of war in the Strait of Hormuz. It is definitely it's all up for grabs. But of course, the U.S.'s position is just as interesting. U.S. President Donald J. Trump has issued a statement suggesting that it's Iran that wants the deal very, very badly. Let's listen to the U.S. President.
Mr. President, are another round of talks planned with Iran? And if so, will you send Vice President J.D. Vance with?
Well, he's done a good job, and Steve and Jared, they've all done a very good job. And I can tell you that we've been called by the other side. They'd like to make a deal very badly.
At the start of these negotiations, the main discussion was surrounding the Strait of Hormuz, the free passage of oil tankers as well as other goods within the region. Naturally, the global energy crisis is deepening. But according to the U.S. position, now the discussions solely rely on Iran's nuclear program. We understand Tehran has been very vocal and adamant in its position to keep its nuclear program. We have, of course, heard from a number of different sources suggest that Iran is in a position where it may be willing to compromise on a number of set procedures with respect to uranium enrichment, but to suggest that Iran will be in a position to give up its entire nuclear program is, of course, a bit of a far stretch. But, of course, the U.S. position also suggests that this is definitely the most important thing on the table. But, again, there are contradicting claims by Washington. In previous operations or attacks by the United States, ranging from Epic Fury, Rising Lion, and Midnight Hammer, the U.S. initially claimed that Iran's nuclear program was completely off the table, but U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance says that there are conditions that still need to be met. Let's listen to the U.S. Vice President.
We've made clear that we absolutely need to see the nuclear material come out of the country of Iran. The ball is in the Iranians' court because we put a lot on the table.
So looking at how things progress, it's going to be just as crucial to see how Iran responds. We understand that at the current moment, the discussion of nuclear weapons is a crucial one. We understand that the previous Iranian administration under Ayatollah Khamenei, the religious and state doctrine was that nuclear weapons was off the table. To suggest that that doctrine will remain in place is unclear, but we understand that Iran's position is to keep its nuclear program. But naturally, we also understand that there have been instances where Iranian leaders have maintained this position. We understand that the Iranian Consul General spoke to RT India, providing a little bit more clarity on that matter. Let's listen to what that statement is.
The Islamic Republic of Iran has repeatedly stated that it does not seek to acquire nuclear weapons. This must be taken into account by the United States. If the United States adopts a more realistic approach, frees itself from Zionist dominance, sets aside individual opinions, and makes decisions systematically, it will realize that the gap between Iran and the United States on nuclear issues is so minimal.
So the discussion about whether there will be another round of negotiations is a crucial one. We understand leading into the first round of negotiations, the main talking point was the Strait of Hormuz. Now the U.S. claims that it's about Iran's nuclear program. But again, for Tehran, Lebanon is a very important subject. We understand that when the United States decided to issue or comply with a 2-week ceasefire, complying with the terms, Israel outright denied the prospects and continued attacking Lebanon. And the way that we're looking at it now suggests that things may rely on how events in Lebanon progress to suggest whether another round is even possible or even reaching an agreement by the end of it, because we understand the Lebanese Prime Minister says that they are committed to ending the war with Israel. That is an assurance that the Lebanese government is providing. Of course, Hezbollah, they've also called for the cancellation or the disarmament of Hezbollah. And then Rubio is, of course, going to host these talks. We know that there are going to be talks hosted in the United States very closely, and depending on how that rolls out, we'll have a better understanding. But naturally, there is diplomacy that is currently being undertaken. There is a lot on the line.
With the economic burden beginning to weigh heavy on some nations, the U.S. president is facing resistance to his blockade of Iranian ports. China has taken a defiant stand. Its defense ministry has made it clear it will continue to use the Strait of Hormuz and honor energy deals with Iran. Closer to the conflict epicenter, Saudi Arabia, it is attempting to insulate itself, fearing retaliation over U.S. actions. Riyadh is reportedly seeking assurances from the Houthis in Yemen for the continued use of the Bab el-Mandab Strait. Reports claim the Saudis have warned Washington it could be making the situation worse. And over in Europe, France and the United Kingdom are steering clear of the conflict, framing neutrality as a matter of national interest. Still, the blowback is being felt across the world, regardless of how involved nations are, with the International Energy Agency issuing a stark warning.
We are following all the damage on the energy infrastructure in the Middle East region. as the things stand now, there are 40, at least 40 energy installations severely or very severely damaged, and it will take some time them to come online. Some of them will be faster, some of them will take even a longer time, but it is sure that we are going to face some tough times in the next days to come.
And joining me now is Ambassador Awsaf Saeed. He's the former secretary to the Indian government and also the ex-ambassador of India to nations including Saudi Arabia as well as Yemen. Ambassador Saeed, thank you very much for speaking with RT India. Let me start with the region itself. With the rising tensions around the Strait of Hormuz, are we looking at a moment where the Gulf is no longer just a theater of crisis, but it is at the core arena of great power signaling? What do you make of it?
Yeah, absolutely. Because right from the first attacks on February 28, combined attacks, the whole region was, put on the tenterhooks because it was not just targeting Iran, but the entire region itself. For the very first time, we saw that in the counter retaliation from Iran, the Gulf countries were targeted simply because they were hosting the US bases. Now, after the negotiations in Islamabad, the first round did not bring about any result. We saw the blockade. This is also a very unusual kind of a blockade, which we have seen from the US trying to block the Strait of Hormuz, which again is a measure with on the one hand, we have the Iranians who are blockading, and the other hand, the US. So this double blockade threatens global oil supplies, risks regional war, severely impacts economies which are relying on oil source from the Strait of Hormuz, including China, India, Korea, and all the countries. So in a nutshell, what has happened was that this is a completely unthought of war, which has been imposed in the region without realizing that the whole region itself will become a hybrid ground for all kinds of military competition which is going to arise there. And more so, I think it has also exposed the US itself in terms of its own security umbrella coming under the question. You see the first, what was they kept on shifting the goalpost when the Strait of Hormuz was open, and when the Iranians put the mines in it, then the goalpost changed to reopening the Hormuz. Now that also couldn't be achieved in the talks. So US itself is using the threat of blockade as a tool to reinitiate negotiations with Iran. So we are in a very piquant situation in the Gulf.
Ambassador Saeed, let me bring in Saudi Arabia here, because Riyadh has long depended on stability in the Strait of Hormuz, even as it maintains close security ties with Washington. Now, how do you think is Saudi Arabia likely to read this particular moment?
You see, Saudi Arabia will be very much worried about this because first and foremost, by this double blockade, it has already there is already a looming energy crisis which is going on, even before the US blockade. Now, with this blockade, this would send the worst kinds of energy shocks the world has seen, perhaps worse than the 1970s and the recent Ukraine war combined together. So these already we had seen the restrictions of shipments through the Strait of Hormuz by more than 90%. Almost around 10 million barrels per day was eliminated. For Saudi Arabia, now the other option is to firstly ensure that there is rerouting to be done to avoid this region. So they have already started as early as mid-March. They started using the Saudi Aramco's East-West pipeline through Yanbu, to utilize a capacity of about 7 million barrels per day. But that does not completely offset the Strait of Hormuz route. This is on the oil side. But more important is on the security hedging. The security umbrella, which they thought, which was functioning very well since World War II, started they begin to start to realize that it is very porous. So you saw the hedging of Saudi Arabia in the form of Saudi-Pakistan, nuclear mutual defense pact, which was signed in September last. And very recently, we saw the Ukrainian president had a very successful visit in the Middle East, where he was able to negotiate a 10-year deal with Saudi Arabia and UAE. So this region, which was hitherto stable, Saudi Arabia heavily relies on the stability because their Vision 2030 relies on the fact that the region should remain stable so that they can focus on their major investment projects and infrastructure projects that they had envisaged. And that promise, and in lieu of the stability, they have also promised investments in the US, trillions of dollars of investments, which they promised when President Trump came in. So all this fell shallow because they were neither consulted before the first strike, nor they were consulted before the US blockade.
Yeah, it's not just Saudi Arabia that is raising concerns at this moment, Ambassador Saeed. Qatar, it is also questioning the Strait's blockade and demanding it be reopened. Listen in.
Security of the Strait of Hormuz, the reality of the Strait of Hormuz cannot be harmed by any escalatory moves by any party. This is condemned internationally, and we have stood against any attempt to politicize or use the Strait of Hormuz in this conflict or any other conflict. And therefore, of course, we are calling for the immediate resumption of maritime activity through the Strait, and we do not accept any pre-imposed conditions on opening the Strait.
Ambassador Saeed, after Riyadh, it is Qatar that is also questioning the Strait's blockade. What is your reaction to that? A final word from you.
You see, I mean, it is but natural for Qatar to, issue such a reaction because much of their gas, which is exported to India, to rest of the Asia, is getting affected. First, it got affected by the earlier blockade from Tehran, but now also more so from US. Now, also, we should also not take this lightly that Iran has issued severe warning that any blockade like this, which continues for a long time, or any attack on its ports would also lead to concomitant and reciprocal attacks on the Gulf infrastructure. So as we hear, I thought that Iran is taking the first move in allowing some of the ships to pass through Strait of Hormuz so that it doesn't become a tug of war. So I think that I'm only hoping that a better sense prevails on both sides and the already tense situation is not escalated further.
All right. Ambassador Asaf Saeed, thank you very much for speaking with RT India, sir. China has laid out its vision for getting things back on track in the Middle East with a peace proposal comprising of 4 key points. The first, creating grounds for peaceful coexistence, pushing dialogue over conflict and immediate de-escalation. Secondly, respecting sovereignty. China said there should be no external interference and nations should determine their own paths. The third is the adherence to international law, reinforcing a rules-based global order. And finally, balancing development with security to allow for economic growth and long-term stability. Beijing said prosperity can be a pathway to peace. Now, Beijing remains one of the key buyers of Iranian oil, raising concerns that a tighter US push around the Strait of Hormuz, it could hit Beijing's economy hard. RT correspondent Konstantin Roskov breaks it down.
All eyes are now on China and how it will respond to the U.S. naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz announced by Donald Trump. Before the conflict, China was buying more than 80% of Iran's oil, which is about 13% of its seaborne crude imports. And even after the fighting escalated, some China-linked tankers were still getting through the strait, allowed to pass by Iranian authorities. So when the U.S. says it will block ships going in and out of Iran's ports, China is clearly among the countries that could be seriously affected. And yet, so far, Beijing is keeping its response restrained. The language is careful, very much in line with China's usual diplomatic style.
The Strait of Hormuz is an important international trade route for goods and energy, and maintaining its security, stability, and unimpeded flow is in the common interest of the international community. The root cause of the obstruction to navigation in the strait lies in the war with Iran. The solution to this problem is an immediate ceasefire and cessation of hostilities. All parties should remain calm and exercise restraint, and China is willing to continue to play a positive and constructive role.
But careful doesn't mean inactive. It may just mean China is playing a longer game. And interestingly, just as the Trump administration is getting more and more bogged down in its Middle Eastern gamble, one of its NATO allies, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, is touring China. Spain under Sanchez has been one of the more defiant voices inside NATO, where when it comes to the U.S.-Israel war in Iran, Madrid even refused to let U.S. aircraft use its basis for strikes on Iran, drawing ire from Trump on social media. Officially, the visit is about economic ties and bilateral relations, but the political message is hard to ignore. China is shaking hands with a NATO outlier, Spain, whose prime minister is effectively urging Beijing to step in and help manage the fallout from international conflicts, including those caused by Washington.
I believe that China can do more, for example, by demanding, as it is doing, that international law be upheld and that conflicts cease in Lebanon, Iran, Gaza, the West Bank, and also in Ukraine, because international law is the foundation of everything.
The real question is, does China stay cautious, or does it start taking a much tougher stance?
The U.S. is forging partnerships elsewhere in Asia with a new defense deal signed with Indonesia. It covers everything from maritime security to drones and special forces training framed around modernization and deterrence through strength.
Partnership will serve as a framework to advance bilateral defense cooperation between the U.S. and Indonesia in order to maintain peace and stability throughout the Indo-Pacific region. This signifies the strength and potential of our security relationship, bolsters regional deterrence, and advances our shared commitment to peace through strength.
But why is it such a big deal? Let's try and understand that. Indonesia, it sits right on a key waterway for India, China, and the world. The Strait of Malacca is a roughly 1,000-kilometer corridor linking the Indian and the Pacific Oceans, underpinning global commerce. Around 40% of the world's trade, it moves through this single route, including some 23 million barrels of oil daily and nearly 29% of all seaborne oil in transit. For China, it's hugely important. Close to 80% of its oil imports pass through the Malacca Strait, making it a critical economic lifeline. Now, the conflict in the Middle East has cast its net far and wide when it comes to economic impact. This is part of RT India's special coverage across the country, gauging how industries and communities, they are coping with the knock-on effects. Local reporter Ankit Salvi, he traveled to the coastline of Mumbai to see how the fishing community there is trying to stay afloat.
Soaring fuel prices and shortage of LPG to run this boat means many fishermen are forced to stay ashore. What's unfolding here is a crisis far removed from the battlefield but directly tied to it. The fishing economy in India's Mumbai city supports millions of livelihoods. From small-scale fishermen to exporters, an entire ecosystem depends on daily catch. But now, that chain is under stress. These fishing vessels are heavily dependent on diesel. Large trawlers burn up to 3,000 liters on a single trip. Even smaller boats need steady fuel supply to stay operational. But with bulk diesel prices surging sharply in recent weeks, many operators say the math simply doesn't add up anymore. The result, boats grounded, trips cancelled, and incomes drying up.
We spend $4,800 and don't get much fish. We can't even pay the boatman. If the price of diesel continues to increase, what will we do? How do we go fishing? We have not been able to export the seafood because the price of diesel has increased.
It's not just fishermen feeling the impact. The fishing economy extends far beyond the shore. Traders, transporters, cold storage workers, and exporters all depend on steady supply. When boats stop sailing, the shock travels across the entire value chain. In Maharashtra alone, the fishing sector employs over 365,000 people. The industry generates an annual turnover of more than $980 million. The timing of the crisis couldn't have been worse. April and May are peak fishing months, crucial for building reserves ahead of the monsoon ban season. But with fewer trips now, even that safety net is at risk. Until the price stabilizes, these boats and the livelihoods tied to them may remain stranded.
And now a story of innocence, hope, and the reality of war. Images recovered from the rubble of a US-Israeli strike on a school in Iran have been put on display at the Iranian embassy in New Delhi. The missile cut short the lives of 168 children in Minab. RT India's Rojita Thete brings us this report.
Angels of Minab. This is the name of the exhibition at the Iranian embassy in New Delhi. 28 drawings on display, all made by little hands who were killed in the US-Israeli strikes on their school in Iran's Minab on February 28th. Now, these images are all that's left to speak for them. 168 schoolgirls were among the 175 people who died.
These pictures actually show brighter side to Iran, which right now is actually under the rubble. For example, here it shows a school bus. Some images actually show ambulance. They show the sun, clouds, aeroplane, children playing here, rainbows.
Though the attack on the school and the violence that continues have altered the children's childhoods, replacing innocence with fear, says Iranian diplomats.
These are the painting of the schoolgirls. Some countries have no stance, but we are Iran. We have a civilization and our root deep in the history for more than 7,000 years.
The Minab school strike has since become one of the most defining flashpoints in the war on Iran. And with ceasefire efforts collapsing and uncertainty growing, these images remain frozen in time. Rojita Thete for RT India.
Bangladesh has said it will continue to seek the extradition of its former leader Sheikh Hasina from India, but insists it won't let the issue get in the way of a reset with New Delhi. Top officials from Dhaka paid a visit to the Indian capital, declaring the country is ready to move on.
We told the Indian side Hasina is a terrorist. She is irrelevant to Bangladesh. She doesn't have any room in Bangladesh. She doesn't hold any importance in Bangladesh. People have moved on.
What we're seeing right now is a clear shift in India-Bangladesh ties. And at the center of this is the very fact that both nations, India and Bangladesh, have decided to move beyond Sheikh Hasina. Now, this remark by Humayun Kabir is extremely important because on one side, he has labeled Sheikh Hasina a killer, a terrorist. But on the other side, he has said this one thing very clearly, that Sheikh Hasina is not relevant in Bangladesh anymore. Now, remember, this remark by Humayun Kabir comes at a very important time. It comes at a time when there is, unrest across the world, and also the tensions in the Middle East, the tensions across the Strait of Hormuz, and also oil prices have surged. Now, this remark also, the stance of Bangladesh towards India and the diplomatic relations clearly aims at bridging and rebuilding ties between both the nations. Now let's understand that a lot of nations have been impacted, a lot of economies are impacted due to the situation in the Middle East, and Bangladesh has been, it's one of the countries that is one of the worst hit because of it, because you see 95% of energy imports that come to Bangladesh have been impacted. The inflation has skyrocketed to about 9%. Also, there has been a 60%, almost 60% increase in LPG prices. So, we are seeing direct and indirect impact of the situation in the Middle East on Bangladesh. And amid all of this, Bangladesh is obviously trying to rebuild its ties. Bangladesh is trying to rebalance its foreign policy. And we have also seen a direct outreach to Delhi, because you see, Bangladesh's foreign minister was in Delhi very recently. He met S. Jaishankar, the foreign minister, external affairs minister. He also met Hardeep Singh Puri, the petroleum minister, and he also met Ajit Doval, who is the NSA, the National Security Advisor. And the meetings were positive, the meetings were successful. And it clearly hints that both nations, India and Bangladesh, are trying to, rebuild ties. And amid all of this, it's very, very important to understand the past context, because, the tensions between India and Bangladesh, they escalated after 2024 when a protest broke out and, Sheikh Hasina was ousted and she sought a political asylum in India. And ever since then, there were tensions, but now situation, seems to be getting back to normal as ties are being, trying to be rebuilt. Also, this is a clear, calibrated reset, and also driven by global pressure and energy needs between both the nations, as both nations try to rebuild ties.
Let's now take a look at some of the other stories making headlines. A school shooting in southeastern Turkey has left 16 injured, with video showing students fleeing for their lives. The attacker was reportedly an 18-year-old former pupil who later turned the weapon on himself after being cornered by security forces. Students, staff and a police officer, they are among the injured, according to officials. The motive is still unclear. Italy has suspended defense agreement with Israel that's been in place for more than 2 decades over the war in West Asia. The deal had covered military cooperation, including equipment transit, training and joint procurement. The move comes as European governments face scrutiny over ties to the widening conflict, with divisions emerging among the ranks in the European Union. And a boost for connectivity in India as the Delhi-Dehradun Expressway is inaugurated. It will drastically cut travel time and offer a gateway north from the capital. It's just faster but aims to preserve habitats as well, with elevated stretches allowing wildlife to continue to navigate the area. The road was opened by Prime Minister Narendra Modi in a boost for northern Indian tourist hubs. And that's all we have for this hour on RT India. You can also visit our website, rt.com, to stay up to date with the latest stories and opinions from around the world. We'll be back shortly.